We've completed the 6th week of studies in New Testament Exposition 1. This lesson was entitled The Acts of the Apostles. This lesson suggested that Luke, the author of Luke's Gospel, was also the author of this work. He was not an apostle, and was not an eyewitness to the material in his Gospel, but was an eyewitness to significant portions of the material in Acts. Luke's close association with the Apostle Paul ensured that the canonical criterion of apostolicity was met. Here we're talking about the we sections in Acts 16, 8 through 17, chapter 20, verse 5 through 15, 21, 1 through 18, and 27, 1 through chapter 28, verse 16. Acts was written in the 60s, as tradition indicates. Paul was martyred around 65 to 66 during the persecution under Nero and the subsequent Great Fire under Rome. Thus, 60 is a reasonable date for the conclusion of the book of Acts, a date of composition shortly thereafter. As we learned earlier, this work is specifically addressed to Theophilus. What we know about him comes from Luke 1, 3 through 4, and he was most likely Luke's literary patron. Luke's purpose was to write an accurate historical narrative designed to edify his Christian readers and to help them evangelize unbelievers. We saw that Luke's historicity is supported by his reliability with regard to geography, whether of Jerusalem, like in Acts 1, 12 through 19, in verse 19, or Asia Minor. He was accurate in his terms that he used for Roman officials, for example, Acts 25, 21, 25. He correctly portrayed ancient culture, for example, Acts 14, 11. And finally, Luke correctly narrates events that are recorded in other ancient historical sources, for example, the famine occurring during the reign of Claudius, recorded in Acts 11, 28. Luke also used sources we may postulate, for example, in Acts 16 through 28, which is dominated by the we sections that best explains as, for example, the reminiscences of the author, or a diary of sorts of the author for the events outside the we sections. Look no further than Paul's interaction with Luke. We found the logic of Peter's Pentecost sermon in chapter 2, verses 14 through 40 was 1, the Spirit had been poured out. 2, Jesus predicted it would happen once he was exalted and ascended, so coming with the Spirit proved that he had been exalted. Chapter 2, verse 33. This universal outpouring eventually brought concerns about Gentile inclusion in the Christ movement, and this was addressed in the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15. The result of this meeting is that the Gentiles do not have to become proselytes to Judaism in order to be a part of the Christ movement. This decision and the activity in the book of Acts in general are an indication that the Holy Spirit's role is clear as the agent of the church's life and growth. It's hard to overestimate the salvation historical role for the Holy Spirit. The book of Acts contains 7 major units. First, the foundation for the church and its mission in chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 2, verse 47. The church in Jerusalem, chapter 3, 1 through 6, 7. The wider horizons of the church in 6, 8 through 9, 31. Peter and the first Gentile convert in 9, 32 through 12, 24. Paul turning to the Gentiles in 12, 25 through 16, 5. Further penetration to the Gentile world in 16, 6 through 19, 20. And 7, on the road to Rome, 1921 through 28:31. As far as the contribution to the canon, we discovered 1, it's volume 2 of the Luke Acts, what Jesus continued to do through the Holy Spirit. Also, we see it was an account of the spread of Christianity from Jerusalem to Rome, chapter 1, verse 8, and of the life and the practices of the early church. Next, given the Spirit of Pentecost and the birth of the New Testament church. Also, the ministry of Peter, John, James, Jesus' half-brother, and others, and the inclusion of the Gentiles by decree of the Jerusalem Council in chapter 15. And finally, the ministry of Paul, to the Jew first and also to the Gentile, in locations to which Paul addressed his letters that are also included in the canon, chapters 13 through 28, but especially chapter 28, verses 23 through 28.